thank you all for coming out this evening. We really appreciate you attending this event. I think we have a wonderful turnout, and I hope everybody really enjoyed networking and meeting some new people. Would love to welcome you all to Ask the Experts, a proven path to growing your customer success team. And I'm sure, as you all have noticed, it's not all about closing the deal anymore. We've found that companies are finding it more and more important to hire very effective customer success teams to then manage those relationships moving forward. So tonight we're going to cover everything from when to hire, how to hire, and the biggest challenges that customer success leaders are facing these days. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Grace Robson. I am our Director of Account Management here at Bets Recruiting. I've been here for about 3 years, and I actually manage our team of 5 account managers who are all out in the audience tonight. Thanks, guys, for being here. And we basically partner with around 150 clients across the U.S., helping them scale their revenue-generating teams. And we're very lucky this evening to have an incredible panel of customer success leaders. Collectively, they have over 20 years of customer success hiring and training on this panel. So definitely take advantage of them this evening. I would like to start by introducing our first panelist, Catherine Blackmore, who is from BlueNose. As Chief Customer Officer, Catherine is responsible for the experience and success of all BlueNose customers. She also owns strategic initiatives around category awareness for the customer success discipline in order to engage and educate the market. Prior to joining BlueNose, Catherine served as the VP of Customer Success at Badgeville, responsible for the satisfaction, loyalty, and advocacy of the company's customer base. She's also held a number of senior leadership positions, including VP of Customer Success at Salesforce.com. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, moving down the line to Ted Chopler. As the VP of Customer Success at Uservoice, Ted builds teams and systems to ensure their customers get the most out of their feedback and support tools. He is also responsible for hiring and onboarding customer success managers at Uservoice. Ted's passions are spicy food, classic rock, and computer games. Next, I would like to introduce Alison Pickens. Alison is the VP of Customer Success at Gainsight. She loves to build teams, design scalable processes, and deliver massive value for customers. Alison learned how to help organizations grow while at BCG and Bain Capital, and decided that she could not pass up the opportunity to work at Gainsight after Bain Capital led their Series B. She has been known to lead her CSM team in rally cries from her old lacrosse days, and spend Sunday mornings trying to relive those days in a recreational league. Thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce Tara Meyer. Tara is Manager of Customer Success at ToutApp, and she is building a customer success team on a mission to help sales teams close more deals with the power of ToutApp. Tara is passionate about scaling processes and their team's growth to drive customer happiness. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're really happy to have such an incredible panel to speak in front of the audience. All right, so for the next 45 minutes, we are going to be picking each of their brains about how to effectively scale a customer success team. Our discussion topics will include when to address your CSM hiring need, the biggest challenges of growing your customer success team, any advice for companies looking to build out a customer success team, and how CSMs work the most effectively alongside sales. So we definitely want to keep this an open discussion, and we will be opening it up for questions at the end from all of you. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first discussion topic we are going to be covering is when to address your CSM hiring needs. And Catherine, I would love to hear from you first on this one. So in your experience, can you give us an example of when you saw the need for a CSM team and what factors came into play leading up to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's an interesting question because if anything, folks that have engaged and even hired not just a team but a first CSM much later in their company's history, when I talk to CEOs and when I talk to leaders of that company, they will oftentimes say, I wish I would have hired that person sooner. And so what I think is a really interesting emerging trend is for those that have had, those leaders who have had exposure to customer success and having, whether it's one CSM or a team of CSMs, engaged in their organization, these repeat CEOs, second-time CEOs, or leaders that have been exposed to customer success will actually hire that individual faster. And in fact, there's a growing trend where customer success is sometimes hired before sales. I know that sounds very controversial and very disruptive, but I'll explain the reason why. In many cases, your CEO and co-founder are oftentimes your chief revenue officer and your chief technologist. So they're the folks designing the product and obviously selling it very early. And so that next hire, I think this is one that's very interesting to challenge the organization around, is customer success. Because really, it's the person that's going to really understand and know whether or not you have product market fit, if there are challenges. And I don't know, for those of you that know a company called Notify, their CEO actually did this. And he talks about the fact that the reason why he did it is because he did not actually want to commission a salesperson until he knew that he could actually keep a customer for 12 months. And that was really the charter of the customer success manager. And quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why I was brought on so early at BlueNose. Now, granted, my role's a bit unique in the sense that I'm a customer success leader in a customer success technology company, but it was really for that same charter. Before we even have customers, before we even have revenue, let's make sure that we have proper product market fit, use the role to get feedback back into the product organization so that we can nail it before we actually just hire and scale a sales organization.
Awesome. That's great. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I'll add just sort of the standard advice for hiring, and I was just having this conversation earlier with somebody ahead of the curve, right? I mean, obviously you don't want to wait until it's too late because then you're going to be in panic mode, and it takes a while to find someone good, or at least in my experience, it takes a while to find someone good. I think it also depends somewhat on the business needs. I think if, for instance, if your churn numbers need some work, that's certainly a good time to do it if you want your customer success organization to focus on churn. One thing that my company, Uservoice, one thing that we did is we wanted our account executives, our salespeople, to really just focus on hunting and pre-sales. So that left this sort of post-sale customer success / account management role very much in need. So that obviously is a good time to do it.
Yep, absolutely. And Alison, what is your advice to someone who's starting from scratch and just starting to build out initial CSM processes?
Yeah, I think at the beginning what's really important is understanding very well what your product is and what's your implementation process, and then designing the hiring profile from there. So for example, for our product, which is also customer success solution, what's required in order to implement Gainsight is business process change, because as you guys all know, customer success is a new function. So customer success teams are just starting to develop what are those processes and strategy for building out my team. So we have to actually keep in mind when we're hiring customer success managers, they need to be well equipped to guide companies through business process change, since that's what's required to adopt our product. Whereas you might imagine another type of product that's highly self-service, can just be sort of adopted bottoms up by users. That requires a different kind of customer success model. So I think the first thing is to really deeply understand your product and then design your strategy from there.
Absolutely. And Tara, what would your advice be to somebody who is starting from scratch to build out initial CSM processes? As I know you did a lot of that at ToutApp.
Yeah, so to tag on to what Catherine said, our VP of Customer Success was actually brought on even before our VP of Sales. I think that what I found is there's so much you can take on within the customer lifecycle. I think I was talking to Brandon and we were saying, what do you do for the 365 days? And rather than tackling every day, figuring out where to start. So our team, we started at the bookends. We said, all right, what does onboarding look like? And then of course we need to get these people to renew. What are we going to do? And what are we going to do 90 days, 6 months out before the renewal? And now one of the challenges and something that's really fun is we're figuring out, okay, now that we have the bookends right, what do we do in between, and how do we talk to customers at month 8 or month 3?
Absolutely. And I know we touched on this a little bit just around hiring a customer success manager or an account executive first, but Ted, what are your thoughts around hiring customer success managers versus account managers? Which would happen first, and what would be their kind of key areas of focus?
Well, I mean, those are both terms that need definition, I think, because many times they're used synonymously. I mean, if I interpret it as, I actually, the way we do it is we kind of tag team an account. Customer success manager really being responsible for the relationship. The account manager, and we're actually not, we're very much designing this process, so I'm going to be using some tentative language, but we're probably not going to be calling them account managers. But the role there is obviously more focused on money. So I actually see them, at least in our model, going hand in hand. The customer, you hire them together, and they work on an account together.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything to add or anything contradicting that?
Just a raise of hands, how many people are focused on customer success in the room today? Okay, so it looks like about a split, and then our rest sales or variety? Sales?
Sales.
A little bit of everything.
Are you gonna? I think we're probably gonna get into the whole revenue aspect.
Yep,
of it
absolutely.
Too,
yeah,
because I think that has a lot to do with perhaps defining
who owns revenue.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So we can jump into, just to piggyback off of that last discussion topic, just advice for companies looking to build a customer success team. So Alison, what have been your best practices around hiring and building a CSM team at Gainsight?
Yeah. So for us, kind of building on my last response, it's very critical to figure out exactly what kind of customer success manager is best for you. I don't actually think that there's like an ideal profile of theoretically what the best CSM looks like. I really think it depends on the company. Also, we don't pay attention to background all that much. So, as Grace mentioned, I come from a strategy consulting and investing background. I actually didn't do customer success before I led this team. But I have had significant operational leadership experience before. I also have people on my team who come from widely different backgrounds who are all very successful. So we have one person who previously was in a training role at Workday. We have someone else who comes from McKinsey in consulting. We have someone else who comes from Deloitte. We have someone else who has like 20 years of experience in account management. So their backgrounds are all really different from each other, but they share a common skill set, which they just happen to acquire in different places. And it's the skill set that we actually really care about and that we screen for in our hiring process. I think another thing to think about when you're starting to scale out your team is what are the different use cases of customers that you're trying to orient your team around. I actually think it's a lot less important to say, okay, here are the big customers and here are the small customers, and we're going to have a team that deals with big ones and a team that deals with small ones. For us, we care a lot more about what's their use case for our product. So we actually have 3 different teams, one of which handles customers that go through a certain implementation process for us, another that handles another type, and then a third team that handles customers in new industries that we're trying to expand into but don't have perfect product market fit yet. So I would sort of think about segmenting your team based on complexity of use case rather than size of customers. And then from there, you can start to figure out what type of person would be best suited toward this level of complexity versus this level.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And Catherine, I know you just hired your first customer success manager, but what have been your best practices kind of leading up to that in order to hire strong CSMs?
Yeah, probably to piggyback on what Alison said, I think that it's probably one of the reasons why customer success, we haven't necessarily come together on a common definition, because it does look different across companies, across our products. And I think really my experience and my strategy has always been around understanding our customer, what our product is doing, and really ensuring that the first resources that I'm hiring are all about getting our customer to value. And so if anything, our investment at a beginning, I mean, you could argue this is a customer success person, because my charter is to help my customer get to a point of where I'm going live and recognizing value of what I've purchased. But their experience and expertise is around integration, implementation, and really focusing on that being our first investment. And then from there, needing to scale. I've learned in many ways the hard way of not actually thinking about what it takes to take someone that is delivering an implementation job. So if you have products that require services or require that person to actually hold the hand of the customer and really lead that project, you need to know how to actually get them to move on to the next project. And if you don't think about what your customer values in that relationship, you can mishire. You can actually hire someone that might, if you look online and say, well, this is a perfect job description of what a CSM should be. It may not be the right fit for what your customers want. So, I've spent a lot of time talking to my customers about we're going to scale. We're going to be looking at actually taking Nick and actually having Nick be 2 people. And so what do you value Nick in terms of that ever-present resource? Well, it's, these 3 things. Great, that's very valuable feedback because that's going to enable me to go higher to that skill set and actually find someone that's going to help us in that motion to where we won't have this dramatic breakup when Nick actually leaves the account. It actually makes perfect sense because this individual is there to drive business value around what will be ever-present.
And then I would love to hear a little bit about career progression of customer success managers because that's obviously important to folks. Tara, what does the career progression look like at ToutApp for a CSM?
Yeah, so I'll use myself as an example. I've had an interesting background at ToutApp. I came on board as one of our first customer success managers. I was working alongside doing support and then proactive customer outreach. I moved over into sales because that's what our company needed at the time and really got to know a lot of our customers, the use cases, our product. And most recently, moved over to lead our customer success team, so I like to think of it as full circle. So at ToutApp, we're still a really young company. We do value growth in people, especially who come to us with a skill set, and we're looking to grow their skill set. So we're actually trying to figure out what does the direction for customer success managers look like, whether it's a team lead, a customer success manager, whether it might even be support or product management, or maybe even sales, because at ToutApp, and I think we'll probably talk about this, of who owns revenue, we own a chunk of the revenue for renewals and upsells. So today, we haven't had too much movement on our team because we're a fairly young team, just 6 months, but it'll be interesting to see what growth looks like.
Absolutely. Alison, what does it look like at Gainsight?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time talking about career progression with my team members. And I think what's most important is actually catering to the individual, because career progression actually means very different things to different people. Some people never want to manage a team. Some people just want to stay individual contributors, but they want to take on more challenges. Other people like variety, so they might want to move from customer success to sales and gain a diversity of experience. Some people might want to sort of interface with customers in a CSM role, but then later move into kind of an ops role supporting the customer success team. So, I sort of consider my job as a manager to understand, what each team member considers to be success a couple years down the road, and then help them chart out their own path and sort of keep an eye out for what the opportunities are that might coincide with that path at Gainsight.
Great. And I know we touched on this a little bit around kind of best practices for hiring and building a CSM team, but Ted, I know you just hired a customer success manager, so I'd love to hear a little bit about really the background that you were looking for in this person, whether it's intangibles or past work experience, and I'd actually love to hear from all of you on this, because I'm sure everyone has different opinions of what would make a strong CSM. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, it was actually a very long and difficult experience for me, and maybe I was looking for, the unicorn, someone who, what I was looking for was someone who had sales skills, because one of the functions that I was looking for in the customer success call was to really sort of generate excitement about new features of our product. So I was looking for those sort of soft sales skills, but at the same time someone who could really be on the side of the customer and to grow the relationship over time. And typically what I found and I'm not sure if this is everyone's use case certainly, but for us. It was really tough, and I ended up finding, looking for people who did sales for a while and then decided it wasn't for them. Great. Yeah, we've seen that quite a bit. How about you, Catherine?
So I think it's going to change again based on the type of product you're talking about, what your go-live process is, essentially what the business needs are, and also part of this could be just in terms of headcount management. So for example, early days in building out a customer success team can mean I need to wear the hat of essentially moving on from implementation. So I need to be able to obviously jump in from a services perspective and understand where the project is and then continue on. But at the same time, I may need to have skills and expertise around having a revenue conversation, because our sales team needs to be in a position to actually continue to land new logos, to actually get a sales organization to go back in and manage upsell, cross-sell, or renewals. May not be the right customer experience, and it may not be what will help you optimize for new business. So I realize, to your point, it can be a bit of a unicorn type conversation. But at the same time, I think it's certainly one that you have to have, because in order to manage that full life cycle of what you need to have covered, if you aren't looking for someone that can help you in the early days, you may find yourself as a leader having to take on some of that work. So, and maybe that's the right thing too. But I think over time, obviously, there becomes an opportunity where you can start to segment, you can justify splitting roles out. But I would even back up beyond that and say there are questions just to be asked in general around how your business is scaling, related to how complex it is to get your customers live and how complex it is for them to adopt your product. And the reason why I say that is that that job may become a full-time job in and of itself, and so valuable because that person holds the key to your customer learning from a change management perspective, how to actually use the solution. They may not have time, even if they have the capability of driving revenue, they may not have time to do that. At the same time, if the revenue side is very complex, selling to large organizations, the contracts are very complex, to actually renew, requires time and energy to set on top of that. Even if I have skills in terms of driving adoption, I may not have the bandwidth to even do that work. So I think it's, as you start to scale, you're going to have to start, even if I have that unicorn, you're going to have to start figuring out what your business needs are in order to optimize, in some cases both, but if your product's not complex, certainly you could optimize more towards revenue than necessarily adoption, or if the contracting side isn't complex, you could optimize more towards the onboarding and adoption side of it. So, these are all questions that you'll need to be asking as you scale. These are certainly things that I had to contemplate across how I've scaled out my customer success organizations.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes into my next question, but as we're on the topic of it, do you think companies with that are selling more complex products, it would be more beneficial to promote somebody that already works at that company that understands the product into the customer success role rather than hiring from the outside?
So I think it's an interesting opportunity from a career progression standpoint. I mean, I think certainly that topic's been discussed in terms of how you actually think about building someone's career. At the same time, there are unique skill sets that may not necessarily be transferable, translatable. So when I think about whether or not it's a complex product, whether or not it's something that from a recruiting standpoint you would be able to promote from within, I guess it's a question of value. So for example, I have a leader that I network with, her biggest challenge right now is that they do have a very complex product, and if anything, who they sell to is actually scientists. And so it presents this interesting kind of quandary where she's actually optimizing to hire somebody that has deep product expertise internally, but the skill set in terms of actually having empathy and connecting with the customers is severely lacking. So that doesn't always mean deep product expertise equals a great CSM. I get that might be an easier fix in terms of someone that understands that, but it may be better served to actually hire more towards the skill sets needed to keep your customers engaged and determine a way you can actually bring that person up to speed in terms of technology.
Absolutely. Alison, what's your opinion on hiring from the outside versus promoting somebody maybe from sales or another function of the organization?
Yeah, we try to promote internally as much as possible, if only to sort of keep morale really high. I mean, I think people invest so much in a company when it's growing that you really want to reward them and help them sort of benefit from the growth of the company to grow together. So our first sort of our default is to try to promote internally. That being said, as you're growing, the skill sets that are required for a given role may change. So it might be that actually the people that you hired a year or two ago are no longer the people who you really need in that role going forward and maybe aren't the right people to be like leading a team of other people. So I think you have to bias toward promoting internally, but also not at the expense of like sacrificing skill set.
Absolutely. And Tara, what has your experience been around hiring from the outside versus promoting from within, and what do you kind of look for in CSM candidates?
Yeah, I think just to get at a more tactical level of what we look for and just what I've seen on our team today as far as the skill set goes. And being a clear communicator is such a broad, and I think probably everyone could say they're a great communicator. For our product specifically, there's so many channels which we're communicating with people. Can be running a training in front of a room of 200 people. So for me, I'm looking for someone that can talk in front of a group of people, is a natural teacher, I think is curious, similar to how salespeople should be curious, someone that asks a ton of questions, because we're the people as customer success leaders or customer success managers that need to really dig into what our customers need, what their use case is, really get to know them. And found the only way to do that is by asking questions. And I think I look for people that can challenge the status quo, so can even challenge what customers are looking to get out of the software, and say, hey, let's try this instead of what you're saying, and then also can communicate internally. So I'd say communication is probably the number one thing. I just read an interesting post about this whole idea of an idea person, and it's this person that always has really great ideas but actually doesn't make anything happen. So a big theme that we look for is someone that can follow through, that can come up with great ideas but can also follow through, because you have to follow through throughout 365 days of the year.
I know there's always a lot of talk around how to compensate customer success managers as well, since it's quite nuanced and a new position these days. So Ted, starting with you, how do you compensate your customer success team? What does the structure look like?
Quite well. That's something that I mean, there are two schools of thought on that. There's do you incentivize or don't you? And I think it very much depends on the objective of the customer success manager. I found, and also what your customer success managers are really what their preference is, because some of them are just very averse to not even just to quotas, but also just to bonuses and any type of incentivization. Whereas some really thrive on it, and again, I think it really just, if your objective is retention, then if your objective is upsell, it probably makes more sense to do commission, and the people who are going to be good at that role and who want to do that role are going to be people who work well under that kind of pressure. But it completely depends, I think.
Absolutely. Alison, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it depends partly on the stage that your company is in, and also on your product and how it's packaged. So in terms of stage of company, for many companies early on, they don't really grow through upsell, and their board also doesn't expect them to grow that way, but their board does expect them to prove product market fit, which is largely shown through retention. So I think companies in the earlier days might want to incent their CSMs based on gross retention, and then sort of consider upsell to be, a bonus, kind of if it happens. And so CSM can kind of pursue it opportunistically. Later on, when upsell becomes more important, you might consider revisiting that decision. Also, if your product naturally has upsell kind of embedded within it, whether it's through additional licenses or cross-sell, selling additional product add-ons, then that might influence your decision. I think the key thing is that if you should choose a compensation model that doesn't mask the problems in your business. Like, I hear about some CSM teams being compensated based on net retention, which includes both churn and upsell. And the problem with that is that if you have significant upsell, it can actually sort of mask loss of customers, which kind of is like the first step, right? You gotta save your customers, and then you gotta grow them. So yeah.
That's great. All right, I would love to move along to how customer success managers work the most effectively alongside sales, as I know we have a lot of sales folks out in the audience as well. So Tara, starting with you, kind of based on your experience at ToutApp, how have you seen customer success managers work the most effectively alongside sales, especially since you were a sales rep to start out with? So.
I would say, especially as we're scaling both our sales and customer success teams, the gray area will kill you. That's like the most dangerous zone you can be in when everything's gray and no one knows whose responsibility it is. So I think one of our first things that we did to really align customer success and sales was just eliminate the gray area. Say, hey, this is what CSMs are going to be responsible for, and this is what sales is going to be responsible for. And we took this and we made probably a half-page checklist. It's about five bullet points when an account comes on board, when a sales member closes the deal, what the handoff looks like for a customer success manager. And our ultimate goal is we want to make this really seamless for the customer, and also make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks, because I might think that Daniel has it and Daniel might think that I have it. So that was one of the biggest things that we've done, and we've actually really evolved our relationship with sales. Sales will have lunches with sales, and we'll just share customer stories with them, which actually helps them in their sales process. And they'll also share. We sell to salespeople, so we're a little bit unique, but they'll tell us about their day-to-day. That way, we can learn more about our customers. I'd say at Tout, we have a really great relationship, customer success and sales.
Great. And Catherine, at BlueNose, who owns revenue? Is it sales or customer success, or kind of combination?
It's both, and that's the way that I've run most of my organizations, and I think that presents an interesting dynamic where you do have to eliminate that gray area, Tara, that you're talking about, because I think that's where it can get confusing. And if anything, I'll probably go more towards Badgeville in terms of an example of where that was probably the most complex, but yet how we addressed it was with a framework that was easy for reps to follow. And so, as you were saying, a lot of times it's, who has the ball, who's owning this conversation. And we wanted to make it super clear so there wasn't just guessing, or in some cases, people approaching the account not knowing that each one of them was driving a separate conversation. And so I think the areas where it was clear would be, okay, customer success owns renewal. Okay, that individual is going to own it from start to finish in terms of running that sales process and owning the revenue around it, forecasting all of that. But what happens if sales is actually engaged in a cross-sell opportunity that could actually impact the original deal? Well, therein lies the rub. So we had to actually get very specific around who actually leads that conversation. And it made more sense for the new business rep to actually lead that conversation, and yet making sure that they're communicating with the customer success manager so there wasn't any miscommunication or misfires in terms of the CSM starting a renewal conversation before that, perhaps even sometimes at the same time that the AE was having that conversation. So I think it can become tricky, and it can lead to, obviously, customer experience issues, potentially lost revenue opportunities if people are negotiating deals differently. But I think coming together with sales and partnering on a framework of knowing exactly, here are the deals we're going to work on together, here's what you own by yourself, here's what I own by myself, can oftentimes help make it much more clear and really help the teams work together more effectively.
Absolutely. And Alison, what has your experience been with this?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what you guys said. I think one exercise that helps make things black and white in terms of who owns what is to put together a RACI framework. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but I've heard of it for the first time a couple months ago. R stands for responsible, A accountable, C consulted, I informed. RACI, kind of a fun acronym. And so basically what you do is you put together a Google Doc where you've got each phase of your customer life cycle sort of in columns, and then the rows you've got different functions within your company. And then for each phase you indicate who is responsible for doing the work, who's ultimately accountable, like whose butt is on the line, so to speak, who needs to be consulted about decisions made, and who just needs to be informed after the fact. So we actually just did this exercise a couple months ago from prospecting through sales, through kickoff, implementation, and onboard, and it just like crystallized all of these gaps that we had that were actually gray areas and made us sort of work through them proactively as a team. I think when there are gray areas, it can be just sort of easy to avoid it until it becomes a crisis, and I think this type of framework helps you get a lot more proactive about that.
Absolutely. Awesome. So now let's talk about demos and how to kind of make the most out of demos. Tara, at ToutApp, how does that work? Does the account executive typically run demos? Does the CSM get involved? What's the process there?
So today our sales team will own the entire new business experience from trial to close. At times we'll bring in a CSM right before the close, but we won't have the CSM won't run the demo. The CSM will ultimately be responsible for the onboarding and then a training. So I'd say I don't have too much experience where we've had a CSM or even someone super versed in the product come in early. I think it's just the nature of our product. It's a really quick implementation, but would love to hear if anyone else has any
Do
ideas.
any of you have experience with that where the CSM has gotten involved with the demo?
Yeah, I mean, I would say involved with the demo, but more in terms of how to help our salespeople do a more effective job of leveraging the demo asset. Meaning that we want our salespeople to be able to really connect with prospects with our demo, and we don't necessarily want to have them just ping somebody else to do their demo for them. However, there's so much value in sales reps understanding the use cases that customer success understands. You know, what do our customers value? You know, how can we incorporate a customer story in terms of what I'm actually describing in our product, having this be more of a narrative than just a bunch of clicks and page views and things like that. So I think we have an opportunity to really help our salespeople be much more effective in the selling motion, but I wouldn't advocate customer success taking it over. I would want to have salespeople learn how to tell the customer story.
Ted, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think originally we actually had customer support people before we had a customer success department. We had support people consulting on the more complicated demos or the demos for the more complex use cases or the real enterprise customers. We then had the customer success managers doing it in the same capacity. And then we hired a sales engineer. Actually, we didn't hire a sales engineer. I lost one of my customer success managers. He became a sales engineer, and he really took that role to really help the salespeople. But I think it's really important for the success manager, if they can be on the demo, it's a great way to start the relationship with the customer, even if they're just sitting in, even if they're not really saying much. It's a great opportunity to start the customer relationship.
Yep, absolutely. And Alison, on your team, when does the CSM get involved in the sales process? Is it during implementation, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so it actually depends on the use case for the customer, and specifically one of those 3 customer segments I was telling you about. So for our most complex customers, which are ones in new industries that we're only just starting to sell into, we actually have kind of a different role that's sort of a hybrid CSM and product marketing role that helps kind of guide the customer through the customer lifecycle, starting with pre-sales. And then also keeps in mind, what are the needs of that client and how can we incorporate those into our product roadmap? So eventually we'll have, more perfect product market fit with that group. So in that case, they start to get involved during what we call like a success acceleration workshop and pre-sales. That's where we define what the use case is, start to quantify the ROI, and then they're involved, throughout implementation later. And in the rest of our business, CSM sometimes gets involved in pre-sales during a similar workshop, but more often they're getting involved starting at kickoff afterwards.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. All right, now let's get to the fun stuff. The biggest challenges of growing the customer success team, as I'm sure they can all learn a lot from you guys and what you've gone through. So, Catherine, what are the biggest challenges you run into? I know you've been VP of Customer Success and Chief Customer Officer at several companies, so biggest things you've run into in growing that team.
Well, and it's one that I would definitely challenge all of you to think about, and that is the customer's experience. So, as we think about early days when you can actually, you personally manage every single customer and ensure that every single touch has your stamp on it and you get to know every single customer really intimately. That may change based on your business model. You actually may have now 50 accounts you have to manage, 100 accounts you may have to manage, or you may need to start to segment who's doing what. It may no longer be that I can deliver training and help you onboard and help you through the life cycle and renew you. There may be new actors. So my story around that was when I was actually a part of Salesforce when we moved from Jigsaw to Data.com being a part of Salesforce.com. And what we found, in order for us to really accelerate growth, we were going to have to segment our process. We had a process where customer success actually owned the renewal, and we had a process where customer success actually owned the relationship. It's not actually how Salesforce managed things. And in learning, through what they were doing with customer success at scale, it became interesting, and I became convinced that we absolutely had to actually adopt some of the same ways that they were structuring the account journey. But the tricky part about it was actually bringing our customers along in that experience. So, for example, if the customer success manager has owned that relationship and all of a sudden you're saying, well, guess what, you now have a renewal manager to actually work with you through the renewal period. And if there's an upsell, cross-sell opportunity, we actually need to re-engage the sales rep to actually upsell, cross-sell, because that's an efficient way to actually run that process in Salesforce's landscape. And in addition to that, there's going to be a separate training organization that's actually going to work with you from a training perspective. Then it becomes, in our case, it was literally overnight, having to think through what that experience was going to look like and how we can actually bring our customers along so that it doesn't go from a startup experience to a large company experience overnight. Now, granted, that's an extreme scenario, but I mention it only because in my accelerated path, I had to make those decisions and figure out a way to get our customers along that journey very quickly. But if anything, those lessons are still to be true for those that are thinking about scaling and seeing challenges around helping your customer understand as you're scaling how that experience will play out so that it doesn't become a moment where they just, I don't get how you guys are working anymore. I'm frustrated with how you're growing.
Too many points of contact.
Exactly.
Ted, how about you?
Well, certainly finding good people. I think another challenge is if the right person is not an internal person, I mean, you're going to have, often there are, support people are really, especially people who've been support people for a while, want to move into customer success. And I think a challenge is, keeping internal people happy, but at the same time finding the right person.
Yeah. Alison, what has your experience been at Gainsight?
Yeah. We haven't had a problem result from this yet, but to me, the biggest risk in my sort of area of the business is burnout risk. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that when you're growing fast, CSM has to make sure to grow ahead of the company, right? Because at the end of every quarter, there's a risk you get saddled with all of these new customers, which your team is not equipped to handle. So what does it mean? It means a bunch of things. One, you have to hire more people than you think you do, usually, and hire ahead. So I'm looking at our sales forecast all the time, and not just at the number of customers, but how many are in each of these customer segments that I talked about before, and where are they in the country, so that I can start to figure out, okay, I need this many customer success managers here and this many here. That's one. You also have to start thinking about, okay, given that hiring is always going to be difficult because it's hard to find the right people, how do we make sure that we're scaling effectively in other ways? And so one way is by automating some sort of communications with customers to give the same impression of special treatment without having to actually get on the phone, right? But be just as effective in driving adoption and educating your customers. So we have actually a person who's entirely dedicated to what we call one-to-many initiatives that include email automation, webinars, things like that. Sometimes known as customer marketing in some organizations. And then also you have to start thinking about how do we have very effective processes so that we're only reaching out to customers when it really matters. So that you're prioritizing effectively across your customer base. Of course, we use our own product to facilitate that. So yeah, to me, burnout risk is the biggest thing, and you got to get ahead of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tara, what have you seen?
Similar, just to bounce off what you were saying, I think looking ahead, so Daniel runs our sales development team, and I'll be talking to Daniel and say, what accounts are you going after? Because I know 3 months, 5 months, that's going to be our new batch of customers. So what do we need to prepare for? What do we need to tighten up from a process standpoint and from a skill standpoint? Something interesting as we were talking about what does the profile of a CSM look like? I think it varies. Something that we're thinking about is this customer marketing. They have so many different titles. So so we've been really focused on our top customers. We tiered our customers and said, let's focus on where the money is right now. We have a huge pool of customers that are a large part of our revenue. And we know what we're doing with our top customers. It just isn't going to work with this longer tail. So we're trying to figure out how do we hire someone? What does that person look like that can do things in a really scalable way and has maybe marketing background? So that's something we're thinking about today.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts and experiences on each of those topics. I would love to open it up for questions from the audience. I'm sure everyone has some things they'd love to ask our panel. So who would like to kick it off?
So what advice would you give to a small company that's really struggling to find product market fit? So leading a customer success team, kind of going into that struggle, really find what that product market fit is, and what advice would you give to the leader of the CS team?
So we play a really active role in that. I mean, just this morning, we actually had an internal 3-hour brainstorming session on a certain aspect of our product that we're trying to improve as a CSM team. Product wasn't even there. And we also have a monthly cadence for communicating feedback from our customers and also internally back to our product team. So I would actually think of yourself as being having the ability to be a leader in driving product market fit, given that you're closest to customers.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, customer success is on the front lines with customers. They can actually be really good assets to vet a conversation with the product team. Like if the product team is building a new feature, for example, and wants to get feedback on it, or if you're forming a customer advisory board, I think a customer success manager, just being so much on the front lines, is in a really unique position to find people.
Yeah, and I would even say get the product team out, to be the advocate of actually not just bringing stories back, but bringing them out into the market as well and helping coordinate that effort just for first-hand experience and listening to what the customers have to say, or even bringing your customers in-house and having them visit you and share those stories firsthand. Yeah.
Questions? I thought your digsonadata.com was the most dramatic version of this, but here, so we're actually resourcing our customer success team a lot more, and so now, the de facto thing is that we have customer success or customer advocates in our organization who have been stretched further than we'd like them to be stretched, and so we're now, and then also ideally we're not having a newly ramped customer advocate just start with all brand new accounts. So you're trying to get a set of accounts where renewals are coming throughout the year. But of course there's that customer relationship that someone's been building from anywhere from a month to many years. How have you found transitioning people into new accounts? For some customers, I know the personality of it, and I'm like, okay, they'll be fine with their new point of contact. The person's equally as good. But how have you I'm just curious to know for the team how you've handled that kind of growth. And it's good because we have more customers, we have more people, resources in the team, but how to maintain the relationship throughout that.
Yeah, I think that it's probably no different than when you're thinking about handing off from a sales perspective, right? What drives customers crazy when you hand off is having to actually repeat themselves, right? And so, if anything, I think the same is true when you're scaling your success team. Do your homework. Do you have a way that you're actually capturing customer notes? And if you don't, what could be the discipline to actually create that so that you do the work for your customer instead of having to get a new resource on the phone and having to have that customer educate the new person from scratch? I think that goes a long way because then that just shows, hey, we care about your time and I've done my homework, and it just shows that you're eager to actually jump in and help them be successful because you take the time to learn about them.
What tool do you use?
Use our own.
So, as with all of these things, it's like with a partner network, you've got to sort of recognize your partner channel team with any given direct sale. I suspect that when you've got salespeople sort of growing accounts from an enterprise perspective, I imagine Salesforce is a big thing. You've got salespeople that are trying to expand, and you've got customer success teams that are managing existing accounts. Our finance teams will say, well, we don't want to double bubble, we don't want to pay both people on the same thing. How do you handle that challenge? I mean, if those guys have come up with anything, I imagine it came up with Salesforce all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comp structures were a bit different in terms of how we were comping a rep versus comping a CSM. Now, granted, at Salesforce, CSMs were comped on an annual bonus program. But at Jigsaw, we did it different, although we had the same challenges because we were selling to large enterprise and we absolutely had concerns over double comping. I wouldn't consider our comp plan for customer success in that case a quota, but it had more to do with expected revenue, and that was more of a target that they were driving towards. And so we were able to justify within their comp plan, which was less leverage than a sales rep, that the overall advantage of what we would get from the sales rep actually being able to expand that relationship, knowing that the CSM may be participating in that conversation, was a net positive such that we could afford both. And certainly from a ROI perspective, there wasn't really any concern that we were going to get into trouble in terms of double comping.
So it was more at a business target level rather than at sort of an individual level?
Yes, correct. That's correct.
So sometimes the scope changes from when the customer gets on board, starts using the product, introduces it to other teams, and then the entire scope changes from when you actually sold the product, right? How can an effective handover occur in that phase, right? There's really no, you'll be repeating yourself. The use case will change. And of course, now the sales engineer said something, and the customer success manager is like, okay, that happened repeatedly, right? So how does that happen? Have you come across such a situation and can you discuss it?
We've had that happen before, where a use case has changed, or maybe the customer thought we did something that we really don't do, and now they're upset because they're like, I thought you can do X, Y, and Z. And so I think it's all about, it goes back to the customer success manager. One, resetting expectations with the customer, and also taking the time to learn about them. And even though they might not want to repeat themselves, I think when you can get them in that honeymoon phase of they just purchased the product, they're really excited, they're fully invested that period of time, you can capitalize on learning more about their business and if there's been any changes. That's how we've approached it at ToutApp.
Yeah.
So, I guess, how have you been able to identify or, kind of deal with, kind of the whole idea of a proactive customer success team and a reactive customer success team? So really knowing, hey, putting out fires, let's fix things, versus like, let's be proactive and kind of driving value. I guess at what points, have you experienced that, and kind of what's been your experience? When did you hit that tipping point? What did you do kind of moving forward?
I think it actually kind of goes back to how quickly you've hired customer success in some cases, maybe not all, or how quickly you've thought about adding additional resources. And so I'll give an example. When I was brought in at Jigsaw, it was actually 3 or 4 years after the sales team had been selling. I mean, granted, it was mostly swipe your credit card online, but when we started to actually get into selling to corporate, to B2B and kind of putting together an inside sales team, it was very soon to see that these AEs just weren't able to handle not just the selling, but dealing with all of the issues that were popping up. And so in that case, I was actually brought in to essentially firefight for my first year, which, we talk about burnout. That's like high burnout when that's like your focus, right? And so I think that the charter for, all of us is really to get out of that mode as quickly as possible. And, you can argue that, hey, one way to do that is to hire early. If those of you who are in that position to think about how quickly, this is one of the reasons why, because it takes a while to actually get out of reactive mode and go to a more proactive state. In some cases, you actually have to overhire in order to get ahead of it, and that's just the investment you have to make so that a portion of my day, not 100%, is reacting, and I can actually spend more time kind of proactively thinking about it. And certainly there's, thank goodness there's solutions now that are actually also going to help teams do that. through things like automating what we're doing, data, all of that just really helps in terms of getting out of that. But ultimately, it requires an investment. Your organization needs to be committed to the people, to the tools, and to the support that you're going to need to get out of that point, or it will just become constant.
I think the really tricky period is when you have to do both, because at some point you just have to invest in improving your processes, and it can be hard, right? Because your team's like, oh my gosh, we have all these other things that we're dealing with. But at the end of the day, you got to be like, look, guys, things are going to be worse, actually, if we don't do these things proactively. So I think to some degree, it just takes like a strong leader to get up and say, look, we got to invest this time. I would also suggest like actually investing in hiring an ops person to support you, because you can get so much leverage out of that person, and your CSMs are going to thank you for it.
Any other questions?
What do you mean an office person, like an admin?
Oh, operations. Yeah, sorry. No, an operations person who can basically help you identify process improvements and also like manage the technology that supports them. Yeah, sorry if that was
quite different.
I was like a private office manager.
We have a great office manager at Gainsight.
Jill.
Yeah, so I know we've talked a little bit about hiring on the first customer success manager, and I know the majority of you guys have kind of customer success doing all of the post-sales work. So how do you, I guess, when do you figure out the first like account manager or the first person designated to like renewals and upselling, or do you think it's best to keep it all in one point of contact on the customer success team?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it depends on your product, depends on your go-to-market strategy. I mean, in some cases, you could potentially have that CSM, that one person, do it all if it's not a complex product to deploy. But if it's absolutely a complex implementation process, you're going to need to start thinking about scaling that person, and you're going to need to start thinking about who's going to own the revenue side, and that could be, in some cases, sales. I mean, there's certainly models where that's absolutely the right thing to do. Focus on adoption and have sales continue until at which time we can actually hire somebody to actually manage the revenue side. That could be a renewal person, it could be an account manager. But I think the optics look a bit different when you're talking about hiring somebody who's revenue producing than someone that might be a part of COGS. And so I think those are all interesting conversations to have around the business model that you're building. And also another reason why it would definitely build a business case around having that ops person, because if anything, whether it's involving the person that's helping you from a salesperson and sales strategy perspective, the same benefit could be held in terms of that individual helping map out and build out the model associated with the customer success organization.
In being in the sales role, I've seen, I guess let me preface this with, I haven't really seen the descriptions of each of these titles of individuals. However, in prospecting, I'll see any title from Chief Customer Officer to Customer Success to Chief Revenue Officer, the VP of Sales. When do you really begin to detail who owns revenue and what the responsibilities are across the board, and really differentiate between those titles and the roles? Does that kind of make sense? Whether or not you're going to hire, or whether or not you're hiring a Chief Customer Officer and they're going to focus more on the customer side as opposed to the revenue side. Because arguably, I guess, if the majority of your revenue is coming from the customer base, maybe that's owned by the Chief Customer Officer as opposed to the Chief Revenue Officer.
I mean, I don't know if you guys, I mean, obviously you guys are familiar with Marketo, and they've actually gone through a number of changes. I know their Chief Customer Officer, and at one point they did not own revenue, and then they actually switched that, and now he actually does own revenue. And he owns the majority of the revenue. I mean, from a customer perspective, given where they are, he has a bigger number than their CRO. But I do think that it's important to outline what the vision is. Now, it may change, in their case it did. But those can be very different skill sets that you're actually hiring for in terms of a CCO versus a CRO. And in some cases, a CRO may have the expectation of owning the full book of business. It's good to know that before you go recruiting and find that person and then, say, nope, I'm sorry, I'm only going to own new bookings. So as a CEO, I think it's important to kind of think about that strategy, because it's going to probably put you down a path of what type of CRO or CCO you may have. Interesting point though about whether VP or C. I think it's another question around who has a seat at the table in terms of the boardroom. Is this a position that you need from a board level perspective? Also, I think it'd be interesting, given your background, I'd be curious to get your feedback on that too, in terms of what you've seen when you were with Bain, in that regard.
Yeah, in terms of who's on the board?
Yeah, meaning like chief versus VP, because I think those are kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually wasn't on the venture side of Bain, so I'll give that caveat. But I think a lot like C versus VP depends in part on how you want to communicate what's important to you as a company. So I think lots of companies that want to show to their board, that they really value customer success will have a C-level executive that's assigned to that. I think also partly it's cultural. So like in the ad tech world, you'll see a lot of chief revenue officers. That's just like, I think, a pretty common thing. You also see the title account management a lot. Maybe that comes actually from like the fact that they support agencies, which tend to have account managers themselves. So some of it might be semantics, some of it might be reflect like the actual makeup of the business and how it's designed.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. All right, let's open it up for one more question if anybody has something they're still dying to ask.
So I was looking for a job for the past, 6 months, and I realized like customer success is it's a lot more at smaller companies, and maybe it's a newer space, I feel like. And I guess, do you see bigger companies adopting the customer success model? And I guess kind of what do you see out of like the evolution of the customer success space in the next, 5 years or 6 years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could probably all chime in on this, but I don't know, for those of you who are familiar with the TSIA organization, so one of the largest, obviously, services, professional organization, and this last TSA conference, which represented, some of the world's largest tech companies attend and are members, customer success was the topic. It was the entire focus. But I think what's interesting, I kind of liken it to like, from a startup perspective, this is a disruptive role. It's a non-traditional way of managing relationships because we have to, because in the cloud, obviously, it doesn't take as much to get started, and that means it doesn't take as much to leave. And so that full business model is very different for legacy on-prem tech companies. And so if anything, it was more of a curiosity, like, well, there's something to this. We need to investigate. They've actually invested in research around it. So I think that's actually really good news for the profession, because it means that the largest companies are thinking about it. But probably those of us in startups are the ones that are probably most nimble and most aggressive in thinking about the role and are testing in new ways, things like customer marketing and the long tail of customers. I mean, that's not where large tech is. They're truly trying to think about, we need to drive to business outcomes, and in doing so, how does customer success fit in? Is it a P&L? Is it a revenue producing head? How do we justify this in a way that makes sense to us because we're a large enterprise managing distinct P&Ls? So it may look a little different, but I think we are definitely starting to see customer success get on the map with larger organizations, because I think it's clear that as large technology companies acquire cloud companies, there's something to the fact that customer success is absolutely critical, and old ways of actually managing relationships just are not going to work.
Does anyone have anything else to add on that?
I think, you're also going to see a shift in what the role requires. And if you look at kind of traditional account management roles, largely it's focused on like building person-to-person relationships. There's sort of a model where you're going on site a lot, you're making sure you're aligned with executives, a lot about like presentation skills and things like that. I think increasingly you're going to see customer success require a lot more tactical ability. So problem solving at a more granular level, being able to kind of like look across a lot of different data sources and sort of figure out how to resolve customer situations. So, I think with this shift, there's going to be kind of a transformation, what type of people are drawn to the role. I think that's big. I think also something we're seeing, like particularly with large companies, is them like sort of bringing renewals in-house, which is going to drive the creation of a lot of CSM roles. So like companies like ServiceSource, which kind of runs a recurring revenue, like outsource recurring revenue model. So companies will sort of outsource their renewals to service source. I mean, they've sort of thrived up until this point because companies haven't had it in-house. But now that companies, especially on the large side, are bringing the CSM role in-house, I think you're going to see a lot of people flocking to this role, a lot of opportunities available, and yeah, more progression in that function.
All right, well, I think that is a wrap for our panel. Let's give each of our panelists a huge round of applause. Thank you guys again for offering to sit on the panel, and thank you all for coming out this evening to join us. If everybody wants to spend the next 30 minutes networking a little more, asking any final questions, feel free. But yeah, thank you again. I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you.